Good evening. Please come on in and grab a song book and turn to number 711, 711. We'll sing the first and third verse. After this song, we'll be led in our opening prayer. Let's sing. Onward rejoicing, I tread my way, higher I'm climbing each passing day. Hilltops of glory now rise in view, where all shall be made new. Hilltops of glory I now can see. Oh, brother, won't you come go with me? Safe on the mountain I soon shall stand. Hilltops of glory land. Footsteps of Jesus before us lead. We tread life's journey, its morning seed. Evil allurements cannot prevail. I'm on the upward trail. Hilltops of glory I now can see. Oh, brother, won't you come go with me? Safe on the mountain I soon shall stand. Hilltops of glory land.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer this evening and thank you for this another time you've blessed us with to allow us to be here, to fellowship one another, to sing praises to you, to study your word. We ask you help us that we go through this Bible class and study this evening, that we clear our minds and we focus on what's being taught, and we learn something and apply it to our lives so we can be a better light for you. We ask you to be with us as we go through this Bible study. We especially ask you to be with all those who are grieving the loss of loved ones right now, and we ask you to comfort them in the best way that you can. We thank you for everything you do for us. Especially thank you for Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
Just the one? Thank you, sir. Good evening. How is everyone? I don't know. I'm here. I hadn't slowed down enough to know. Sir? Hot? Oh, ha. Is that German? Do I? Oh, ha. Ha ha. Thanks, brother. I needed that. We are in chapter 11 in Proverbs, and I want to go ahead and get right to that. Of course, I can't really begin the class without making sure everyone has been informed that this morning our Sister Vines passed away, and the funeral will be Friday. We'll be making more announcement about that at the end of the service, of course, but just want to make sure that everyone knew that. And anyway, it's been a tough time for all of us, but we're thankful that she's no longer suffering and that she's able to go on and be with her loved ones and be with her Lord. So chapter 11 is where we were last week, and as you recall, we took a minute to talk about dishonest scales and dishonesty in general. to discuss lying and why it's wrong to lie. Just about 2 hours ago, I had yet another study with Duncan in Kisii, Kenya, and it was really kind of interesting. We actually looked at Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, and it was interesting to me to see and to point out what God thinks about lying, among other things that are revealed in this chapter. But when you think about what Peter said to both Ananias and Sapphira in that chapter, it just seems so obvious. I mean, you had this land, it belonged to you, no one compelled you or forced you to sell it, but you sold it. And now you've brought the proceeds, at least a portion of it, but you're pretending, you're acting as though you're bringing the full amount of the sale, when in fact you kept back part of the price of the land. It was a lie. It was a deception. It was an attempt to make themselves look better when in fact they were not really what they were pretending to be. So God showed his displeasure. And as Duncan said, well, we see that the judgment of God is intact, and he will not allow that sort of thing to take place in the Lord's church. Now, we mentioned in a hurried fashion last week some of the practical downsides to lying in general, and how lying hurts everyone that it touches. We, of course, can't help but note, the news and the fact that we have a hard time trusting what we're seeing and hearing on the news broadcast, because we know that, well, a lot of times they have a political agenda or what have you, or a certain slant, and so we're not sure we're getting the accurate facts every time, and sometimes we're just being plain lied to. I mean, bald-faced lied to about certain events and individuals, so that it really diminishes our ability to trust those who are the disseminators of information, and that's not healthy for any society to be in that situation. Of course, we noted, again, kind of near the end in a hurried fashion, one of the reasons we might say that God is so opposed to lying, and we should be opposed to lying, generally speaking, is when we understand its origin. And the father of lies is, of course, none other than Satan himself. He lied in the very beginning by simply denying, what God had affirmed in his word, and so, of course, brought all of the tragedy into the world, introduced it, and it began with a lie. And so, again, we understand the serious nature of it. But this evening, I want to pick up in the next section, beginning at verse 3. I'm not sure how many verses there. These are like in blocks. The thought process, they're in blocks. And sometimes within the block, there are seemingly random proverbs, and we'll try to address that when we can. But let's look at verse 3. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness, and the righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. When a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of the unjust perishes. The righteous is delivered from trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there is jubilation. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to kind of break down some of these categories of thought, if you will. When the wicked dies, his hope will perish. What does that mean? What does he mean by that proverb? Anybody, quickly. I'm sorry?
If he's wicked, then he would be unsaved.
Well, he's unsaved, that's true. I'm sorry?
he has no more hold over them. He's got
No hope.
As long as a person's alive, they have an opportunity to repent.
That's right.
But once they die,
He didn't have it
they
anymore.
don't have any more opportunities.
And we're going to see it later. Maybe it's in Ecclesiastes, but you know, a living dog is better than a dead lion, because in the living dog there's hope, right? I mean, I think that's true here too. You could look at it and read it in a little different light as well. When you think about the life of the wicked, and in his lifetime or her lifetime, where was their hope? What did they put their hope in? And their hope is in the transient, in the passing, in the temporary, in this world. And so when they die, whatever they were hoping in, whatever they were trusting in, well, it dies too, with them at least, because that's all they had. Their hope was not in something eternal. It was not in something beyond the seen, but rather in the visible. And the expectation of wealth perishes too. Now, it kind of helped me remind me of the passage in Ecclesiastes 2. That chapter in particular where Solomon pretty much lays out a life of just doing whatever he wanted, whatever he felt like doing, and pursued whatever he wanted to pursue to the max. He didn't restrain himself in any way, shape, or form. And he pursued everything that there was to pursue to the ultimate extent. And when he finished pursuing all of these things, what was his conclusion? Vanity and vexation of spirit. What does that mean, vexation of spirit? Anybody want to explain that to me?
It's not, it doesn't, you can't be happy. It's
constantly irritated.
yeah.
Constantly irritated. Irritation is probably a good synonym for vexed. I'm sorry?
Never satisfied.
Never satisfied.
Spirit is never satisfied.
When you're
Vexed.
searching for all that worldly stuff.
And that's all borne out, I think, in his observations. That there's nothing in this world that will satisfy. You know, Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, charge them that are rich in this world not to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who freely gives us all things. So again, the trust, the faith is misguided by many, in fact, most, because their hope, their confidence is in the here and now, and the here and now is a very temporary thing. And most of you in the class know what I mean when I say the older you get, the more rapid you realize time is moving, and that, I mean, truly, our life is but a vapor. We think we're about the time we're getting started good, we're done. And so it's time for another generation. So again, what's the point? That's what Solomon was asking for anyone who would live the life of the wicked. And of course, we see here in verse 4 of our reading, riches won't help on the day of judgment, but right living can save you from death. So when you think about that as well, here's an individual that has, let's say, gained the whole world. They have all the riches there are to accumulate. You could be the richest man or woman in the world when you die. But on the day of judgment, of what value is that to you? Because you're not going to have any money with you, no debit cards, no credit cards. You're not going to have any stocks or holdings, or you can't take anything of this world that you think is of value before the judgment seat. And so, again, when you think about our Lord, and we keep coming back to this, because when Jesus died, when he breathed his last on the cross, what did he possess as far as we know? What did he possess? A seamless garment. A seamless garment. That's all he had. And yet, he was rich in every sense. He lived the richest life a person could possibly lead, even though they did horribly murder him. Again, the way we define success and the way we define happiness and fulfillment and the way God views it are often very different things. God rescues the godly from danger, and he lets the wicked fall into trouble. What does that mean? Okay.
He gives us a way out, but it's up to us to take it.
Dig a pit, you'll fall into it. I thought about two ways I could do this, and I finally decided to just go ahead and do it this way. I want to ask you to turn with me to the book of Esther. You know, sometimes you can just kind of take an account, a historical event in the Bible, and you kind of just dwindle it down to, you know, I guess a synopsis, and say, well, here's what we're reading about in this book. And I thought about that. I thought I'll just share this story, kind of give an overview. But this is some of the richest literature on planet Earth. This is sweet when you read it, and so it's hard to really do it justice by just giving an overview of it. Let me see where we want to begin. Let's look at chapter 5 of Esther. Let's just begin here. And I want you to be thinking about this proverb while we're reading this. It happened on the third day. By the way, very quickly, for everyone's benefit, what's happening in the book of Esther, other than she was now the crowned queen of Persia, taking the place of Vashti? We get that part, but what's the next storyline? What's the main storyline here?
Kill all the Jews.
Haman wanted to kill the Jews.
He hates Mordecai.
He hates Mordecai.
He won't bow down to it.
Petty, you talk about petty. Yeah, this man won't show me proper respect, and he won't bow to me, and so I just want to kill all of the Jews. That sounds like a common theme with certain people, doesn't it? But anyway, be careful what you're wishing for. So it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." And the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done." Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." So Haman went out that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, "Besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I'm again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, and then go merrily with the king to the banquet." And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. It was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And then the king said, "What honor or dignity had been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who was in the court?" Now, Haman, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he prepared for him. And the king's servant said to him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate, leaving nothing undone of all that you have spoken. So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Queen Esther answered and said, if I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. And King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Haman was terrified before the king and queen, and the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? And as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbonah, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. The king said, hang him on it. And so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. You know, it's hard to read something like that and just not, it's just, I don't know about you, it's like, wow, why didn't Hollywood take something like this, you know, you can make a movie out of this. I mean, it's rich stuff. I mean, can you imagine the king come back in the house and there he is all draped out over his wife. He's already mad. I mean, wow, he was in deep trouble for sure. Anyway, he lets the wicked fall into trouble. And a lot of times it's the trouble they've made for themselves. And so, like you say, we reap what we sow. And so we have the justice of God borne out in this text. Okay, any questions or comments you have? All right, fine then. We'll turn to Proverbs 11 again. And let's see what verse we're going to look at. Verse 2? When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. What is pride? How does it manifest itself? You? Me. That's pride. It's all about me, right? We heard something about that today at lunch, didn't we? We heard someone describing pride and how it can be a person's undoing, or even their ministry for that matter. But it truly is, I think you just summarized it. That's the best answer. What is pride? It's all about, what have you done for me? Or, how does this benefit me? Or why are you arguing with me? Why don't you just do what I tell you to do? Pride is what we call, you're stiffening your heart, you're hardening your resolve against anyone that would question you about anything, because I'm right and everybody else is wrong, and I know that, and everybody else should know it too. Humility, on the other hand, is what? Okay. A quiet spirit, okay. It is quiet, no doubt. What is humility, though? Is it wimpy? Okay, recognizing I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. I too make mistakes. I'm not the center of the universe. Other people have considerations and concerns and needs, and not just me. So, I'm sorry? That's right.
There's a higher power than you. It's realizing that you're not the be all end all, and there's absolutely someone in control.
You remember? Is it Daniel 4? I believe it was Daniel 4 where Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. Well, actually, he walked out on his palace, and he outside of his palace and beheld his kingdom. Was that chapter 4 or chapter 5? Anyway, he talked about how he had obtained all this great power and wealth and dominance around the world, and the Lord knew that. He knew of his pride, and so what did God do to Nebuchadnezzar? Do you remember? He had him on the ground eating grass and behaving like a wild beast. And this continued until he was humble and he realized God rules in the kingdoms of men, and he gives it to whomever he chooses. And so rather than being proud and puffed up, bragging about how great and wonderful you are, how the world couldn't do without me, he learned a very difficult lesson. And God has a good sense of humor when you think about it. I heard eating like an animal, grass. I think there's a condition. I don't know. Someone might look that up. Jonathan, you probably know how to do that. But there's some kind of actual condition. People have actually done that. Their fingernails grow really long, and they desire to eat grass and things like some kind of weird malady, but kind of like rabies or something. Beauty and the Beast? You speaking from experience? What?
I think the worst thing about what we're talking about is that it's one of the things God hates.
Yes, that's right. A proud look and a lying tongue. That's all on that list too. When I think of humility, I think of great ability, great power, great strength, tempered with that sense of my own weakness, of my own true standing. The question that I have, how could the Son of God in human form be humble? And yes, I know he restrained his power. Clearly he did that. He restrained, all that he had, because to save us it was necessary. But how can he do that when he did not sin? He actually was a perfect human being. He showed us exactly what it means to be a human being. And I think the only answer to my question is the incarnation, because he recognized in the flesh here on planet Earth with us that his Father, as he said, is greater than I in that station, in that condition, a place, a condition that he had willingly and freely placed himself in for our sake. So it was humility, it was true humility, It was strength restrained, great power, awesome power restrained. And so it was indeed humility. And that's what I think humility requires is it's not just that, I'm not a bad person. I don't get in people's face or whatever. You really, there's no moral benefit to someone saying, well, I get along with everybody. I'm not. If you didn't have the ability to beat people in the dirt, if you don't have the power and the strength to overpower somebody, but then you say, well, I've never been mean to anybody in my life. Yeah, but you don't know how to be. You can't be. You're no threat. In other words, if you don't have the power and the ability, then it's not really humility. It's just weakness, right? But I think why in our mind we confuse the two. We think if somebody's humble, it means they're weak. And it's actually quite the opposite. Someone who has strength and knows it, understands it, but at the same time recognizes their own limitations and their own weaknesses. Now, in the case of Jesus, there were no flaws, but there was an inferior position he placed himself in, Philippians 2, 5 to 11, because he wanted to save us. But again, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. He taught a lot about humility. Let's look at Luke 14 very quickly, and then we'll move on. But Luke 14, and we'll begin at, let's say, verse 7. He told a parable to those who were invited. And he noted how that, well, let's go back and read. This is verse 1. It happened as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath that they watched him closely. So he's in a Pharisee's home. He's been invited there. He's eating there. And so he told a parable to those who were invited, and they were with him, obviously, when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them. Now, hold on, before we continue. Why would they do that? Why would someone come to a feast like that, invited to someone's home, someone of perhaps some repute in town, come to the home and then assume to sit in the best seat in the house? Why would someone do that? Pride. What would be the basis of their pride? Well, yeah, but specifically in the case of these Jews, the Pharisees, what would be the basis of their pride? Maybe they had a position on the Sanhedrin, and they had some power, some influence, perhaps. And so I'm somebody, and I'm a Pharisee. And look at my phylacteries. Aren't they beautiful? And look at all these scriptures I have plastered all over me. And look how many prayers I've been praying this week. They really were proud of themselves. They would have people go before them and blow a trumpet. Hey, I'm about to pray. Y'all pay attention. And I'm going to say this beautiful prayer about myself, how glad I am not to be like all these already sorry sinners around here. I'm a great person, and God's glad to have me. And that's Luke 18. But you can see that kind of pride is disgusting. It's sickening. And everybody recognizes that. But in spite of how disgusting and sickening it is, it persists. People are still behaving the same way, with the same arrogant presumption. And it's like, why? Why would anybody, in light of the gospel, continue? But anyway, he said, when you're invited to by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. Now, when you think about this parable, it sounds like a variation on the Proverbs that we're reading. And Jesus is just kind of giving a practical daily example of how these Proverbs would play out. And he's saying, and this is a kind of a practical warning, something that will benefit you. Don't presume, because you might get embarrassed. And so he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Isn't that fascinating, how the Lord could take a parable like this and just explain it in very practical terms? And he's in the home of this Pharisee, and they're all vying for the best seat in the house. And he's saying you all would be better off if you wouldn't assume so much and just take a lower seat and then let someone come along and exalt you. Okay, when the righteous prosper, verse 10, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. That sounds almost cruel, doesn't it? I mean, we're happy that I don't think it's so much the demise of individual bad people. I think it's more this general look at society as a whole, our city, the place where people congregate. And so when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. In other words, the city's benefited. When things go well with the righteous, then things go well with the city. And then the converse of that is that when the wicked perish, then people are happy, they're joyful, they're relieved that a bad person or a bad regime was taken out of the way. And so now we're rejoicing. What does this suggest to you? Anything, anybody? This concept.
To me, it makes me feel that if we live as godly people, then He will bless us to be blessed.
Okay, and you'll be blessed, but will the city be blessed?
Can be.
If there are a bunch of people in a city, a number of people in a city, and they were living a righteous life, and they're blessed, well then the city is blessed. The fewer righteous people you have in a city, the less blessed it's likely to be, right? I mean, I think that's the simple idea in this proverb. It's not really that difficult. I remember many years ago, Brother Rex Turner we were discussing in our class judicial hardening. It's a concept that's used, we see it a lot in the Old Testament, where nations would rise and fall, and we see it played out historically where a nation would digress. They would move away from God, and they would digress into whatever sinful behavior, what have you. And it would come to what we would call a tipping point, okay, the point of no return. In other words, the thing has gotten so out of control, so bad, that God just says, enough. You think about Genesis 6, for example. When God looked at man, whom He had made, and He saw that every thought in his heart was only evil continually, and God said, I'm sorry that I made man. And so that's one of those first examples of this judicial hardening. And so we see it repeated in many other instances, like with the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. For example, Genesis 18:32. This is Abraham pleading. He's actually Jewing God down. I shouldn't have said that, but he was he was negotiating. He wasn't a Jew, by the way. He was a Hebrew, but the Jews came from Abraham. Anyway, he's bargaining. He's negotiating with God, and he makes this final request. He's timid about it, but he's really determined. If he can, any way I can save these cities, and so may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there in these wicked cities? And he answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. What does that tell you? Yeah. If there's 10 righteous people, I'll spare it. Why? Why would God do that? He's a good God. He's also practical, smart. He knows there comes a point of no return. You remember what He said to Abraham as well. He promised that your descendants will inherit the land of Canaan. But it's going to be a while, and the reason it's going to be a while is that the sin of the Amorite is not yet full. But there's going to come a time when that sin has reached a tipping point. In other words, their culture is so far gone, it's not salvageable. So He would use the Israelites as His avenging army to literally bring judgment on the people of Canaan, to destroy them, and then to occupy their land, which is exactly what happened. And then, of course, in time, Israel would be ripped from their land, and an occupying force would come in. Why? Because Israel, like the nation before them, had also forgotten God and had digressed into sin. And this whole pattern continues to repeat itself, and it's like culture just, for whatever reason, can't contain themselves for too long a period of time. But this is something that Brother Rex Turner had speculated about many years ago, and it's always intrigued me. But we were discussing the end of the age, the end of this world as we know it, and we don't know the day or the hour, and we don't even try to predict it. He said, and no one should even try, because we know that not even the angels in heaven or the Son of Man, when he was here at least, didn't know when that day would be. So we shouldn't presume to know when we think we know. However, it's fair to assume, he said, based on what we see, this pattern is throughout Scripture, that there's going to reach a tipping point, and humanity will be so far gone that just like it was in the days of Noah, there's no redeeming, there's no turning back from this. I mean, things have gotten so out of control, you can't count on parents to teach their kids or their grandparents to teach their children. It's just not going to happen because it's just too far gone. Maybe that's just a guess, and he admitted it's just a guess, and it's just a guess that I'm sharing with you here. It's not by no means a declaration, and we wouldn't even know when that time would be. None of us could predict that either, because God knows the hearts of men, and we do not. So again, we'd have to be careful with that. But Jesus did say, and he asked the question, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? So, you know, that's maybe lends credibility to that concept. I don't know. Jeremiah dealt with the same thing in his ministry, that it was the end. Judah had gone as far as God was going to allow it to go. And God challenged Jeremiah, go up and down the streets of Jerusalem, look around, consider, search through her squares. If you can find but one person who deals honestly, seeks the truth, I will forgive this city. I mean, that's lowering the bar from 10 to 1. If you can just find one. And, of course, Jeremiah was unsuccessful. And so the same would be true for us. Okay. A man who lacks judgment derides his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his tongue. Verse 12, if you see here, the reading is a little different. He who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor. Sometimes it's not always clear when you read certain versions, but the King James is a very good text, and I tend to kind of gravitate toward it, but I like this. I think this pretty much summarizes it. A man who lacks judgment derides his neighbor. What does deriding your neighbor mean? Anybody, quickly, what does that mean? You run them down. You belittle them, okay? Some versions use the term belittle. Okay, but who does that? A man who lacks judgment. Why is it a reflection of a lack of judgment, or what does it suggest, a lack of judgment, if you're going to belittle your neighbor? Why would that be the case?
Because we should edify the women.
Okay, yeah, should build up. But you know, my neighbor's kind of stupid. I mean, you know. Yeah, I love my neighbor, but he ain't got good sense. You ever seen what my neighbor does on Friday nights? And you understand? But again, if you say, "Well, I'm loving him and I'm good," but you know, man, he's really. Why would you be lacking sense to do that?
The old adage that parents used to say was, "Can't say nothing."
Don't say anything at all. Well, it may not occur to these people that lack judgment. If you're running your neighbor down, it's kind of like the Ham and Mordecai thing. Eventually, those horrible things you're saying about your neighbor is going to come back on you, and it's going to hurt you. And so while you're trying to run your neighbor down and you're trying to discredit and hurt your neighbor and going on some kind of campaign to make your neighbor look like a bozo or whatever, you wind up being the bozo. And it's just not good. And so a man of understanding keeps his mouth shut. Doesn't mean he doesn't have an opinion about his neighbor. It means I'm not telling everybody about it. You know, then we have the gossip who betrays confidence. A trustworthy person keeps a secret. What's gossip? I know everybody has their own definition. Quickly, what's gossip? Telling tales? I tell tales all the time.
Well, it tells to make other people look bad.
Okay.
That doesn't even though it may be true, you don't need to spread it around to everybody to make that person.
Even though it may be true. That's an interesting observation. I agree with that too. Kind of remind me of what Peter said in 1 Peter 4:8. Above all, love each other deeply, because love does what? Covers over a multitude of sins. Isn't that interesting? You're aware of the sin, but you're not heralding that sin. You're not spreading news of that sin because you love your neighbor. You love those that are close to you. So even though you know they're weak, even though you know they have flaws, you don't spread it around. You don't run them down to other people. And besides, if you do, you lack good judgment because it will eventually come back and hurt you most. So I like these, I don't know about y'all, I like the Proverbs because some of them are a little difficult to understand because the translation, it can be difficult in some of these, but I think we're getting the gist of it. But it's just practical, practical stuff. But any questions or comments? Thank you.